right, Sheriff, you win. You ran my father out of town, now you're trying to run me out of town. Well, the Durneys don't give up that easy. Oh, it's too hot.
Cut!
Stand by.
Well, it's too hot. It's too damn hot. The cameraman's frying me.
Neely. Neely!
Shut up!
She's full of sauce.
It's not booze, it's pills. Send for a husband. Look, Neely. We've got to finish this take.
Get lost. I'm through for the day.
Hi, this is Dan. And as we see, the entertainment industry continues to come up with all sorts of excuses as to why they are in such trouble right now. And we see that it is getting worse and worse. Now, one of the big things that is coming out is that the summer movies, which are intended to drive the whole season, are not performing well. We've had several already very, very big flops, like Furiosa, like Fall Guy. So these are not good times, and they are being exacerbated by an ongoing attitude amongst many in the industry elite that they're going to keep doubling down on disaster rather than trying to fix the issue. Let's talk about some of the issues that are indeed facing the entertainment industry from a little bit more of an historical perspective. First of all, let's start with, why was the entertainment industry so successful to begin with? On the one hand, it was indeed an absolute model of entrepreneurism in action. After all, most of the original studio heads came from nothing. They were dirt poor, but they had what in my generation was called guts. They were willing to face the challenges. They were willing to face the anti-Semitism of the era and pretty much carve the industry out of nothing, purely from having understood what it takes to go from being someone who's selling rugs or a junk man into being the head of an enormous studio that was responsible for delivering the goods. And in spite of the success that they were having, still not being allowed to live in the nice areas of Hollywood, which included at that time Bunker Hill and downtown LA. In fact, very few of the pioneers of the entertainment industry were allowed to buy in those areas because of their Jewish heritage. So instead, they went out into what was called no man's land and started building there. That area, of course, is now called Beverly Hills. So they even were able to overcome that limitation. But they had one advantage, and that is that they were dealing in a very capital-intensive industry and one that made money very quickly and unexpectedly. So there was no opportunity outside of their contacts with Wall Street, and at that time as well, a limited number of that proportion of people on Wall Street who were still rather suspicious of Jewish-owned businesses. Nevertheless, they did find those angel investors, and they themselves would set up their main offices in the city. And in the process of that, they would acquire theater. They would be working with the various theater chains from the various circuits. The Keith Orpheum circuit was one of the largest and most successful of the vaudeville circuits. And so they owned a lot of the prestige houses throughout town. Paramount and Loews Incorporated, which would own MGM, and the rest usually were managed out of New York, which is often unknown, especially by film history textbooks, which get the entire Paramount decree of 1948 backwards. That decree separated the theaters from the studios. And it is always depicted that the studios lost the theaters, except for the fact that theaters own the studios. What the theaters lost was an enormous financial burden, as well as the need to actually support the studio. It's not as if they didn't immediately go back and start creating deals because they needed output. But just the fact that it's characterized wrong is indicative of why Hollywood today is refusing to see what the business side is dictating is coming down the pike. the biggest challenge the industry is facing is that it is no longer oligarchic. The thing that kept the entertainment industry doing so well for so many generations is because they were an oligarchy. There were very few studios, and all of the entertainment throughout the country was being provided by just these 5 or 6 big companies. Yes, you would have a company like Columbia rise from a low budget company into a big major, but there still wasn't all that much in terms of multiple other sources where people could find their entertainment. Now let's look at the age of television. Now, television started as an enormous competition to filmed entertainment.
Today, to get the public to attend a picture show, it's not enough to advertise a famous star they know. If you want to get the crowds to come around, you gotta have glorious Technicolor, breathtaking CinemaScope, and stereophonic sound.
But it quickly became one of its greatest allies. In 1948, you started having the TV stations buy studio shorts, often cartoons, often short westerns and other serials, and those helped fill out their schedules. Later on, you started having the studio sell packages of their movies to the TV stations, thus informing the golden age of independent filmmakers, where such great directors as Spielberg, Lucas, Scorsese, and Coppola cut their teeth first by watching a lot of the classic movies on television, learning the grammar, becoming impassioned by it. And finally, in 1955, the movie Marty was the first time a project that originated in television as a live 1-hour drama was made into a feature film that ended up being the biggest hit of the year, despite not being in widescreen or stereophonic sound or 3D or any of the tricks that the studios were trying to get people out of the home and back into the theater. And it being in black and white on top of that meant that the war between television and feature films was over, that they could both coexist beautifully. Thus began the windowsing system. In the late 70s, you had the rise of 2 additional competitive forces, one of which was home video, which allowed consumers for the first time to own video cassettes of studio films. Now, these were very expensive at first. I mean, in adjusted dollars, a blank tape was about $40 in today's money, and a pre-recorded tape was several $100s. But yet that established a beachhead because people wanted to see movies without commercials and without being censored. So Andre Blake created magnetic home video, which started out with a licensing of a bunch of 20th Century Fox films, which included MASH and Patton, and would soon include The Sound of Music and The Making of Star Wars. So that became another source of revenue. On top of that, you started having basic cable stations be formed. It started out as superstations such as WTBS, WWOR, and WWGN. And those would run old rerun shows and old movies that were also available on many local stations in other markets, but in smaller markets gave people access to reruns and all of that. Going hand in hand with that came the rise of home box office, which started out as showing nothing but newer movies, also uncut, also without commercial interruptions. And in between the showings of those movies, you would have a blank screen. But that became much more popular. It was almost like Netflix at the beginning of its rise, where it started out with fabulously wealthy people who could afford of very high-speed broadband type internet, and it gradually trickled down. Well, that's what happened with HBO, because please remember, when HBO first started, the equivalent monthly fee for just HBO, not an entire cable package, was roughly $70 in today's money. So it was not cheap. But it quickly caught people's attention. That created another window of distribution. So between all of that, you had numerous players who were all competitive, but were still controlled by a relatively few number of companies. So the entertainment industry and the product that it was making was still very, very special because not that many people did it. And those that did had to be well-heeled. Truthfully, even in the 1970s, when the financial interest and syndication rules landed, which stated that a network could not have more than 2 runs of any given episode of a series that it was running on network, because that was considered vertical integration and was in quasi violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. So for the next 25 years, the studios the networks could not have ownership stake in the rerun life of any of the shows that they showed. This allowed for many enormous independent producing companies such as Carsey Warner, such as the Bloodward Thomas Group, such as Spelling, to create huge empires by ownership of shows, which they would handle the deficit, the amount that went beyond the network cost, because they would keep all rerun rights. Now we come to the 90s, when all of a sudden the financial interest and syndication rules ended, and so networks could own pieces of every movie or TV show. At the same time, the Paramount decrees stopped being enforced. That allowed Disney to buy ABC. And then Wall Street came in, because mergers and acquisitions, as more and more studios started buying networks, came into high focus. And it is at this point that the beginnings of the end could be seen in terms of programming running the risk of there being too much of a good thing. There was a joke, 30 channels and nothing to see. That quickly became 300 channels and nothing to see. With the rise of Netflix, quickly followed by the rise of Disney Plus and all the other streaming services, all with new programming, the number of individual projects that would come out every year increased enormously. And not only that, but movies and TV shows were so ubiquitous that they were no longer something special. They had become a commodity, not unlike the toothpaste or laundry detergent you buy. And one of the tricks around something becoming a commodity, where yeah, somebody might like one brand or another, but they really don't care. There really is no shortage of options. The only way to get past that is to either come up with a new niche for yourself, or to just be content with being part of an entire shelf worth of the same product in a grocery store, each with its own little marketing gimmick, but none of which really, outside of real brand aficionados, makes all that much of a difference. So what's happened with the industry becoming commoditized is that it is now looking for its next trick. In the world of toothpaste, this allowed for entrepreneurship, such as the electric toothbrush. Now, the electric toothbrush had no interest for the consumer. But what the electric toothbrush manufacturers did was they started selling their electronic toothbrushes not directly to the consumer, but first to the toothpaste makers. So now you have the toothpaste makers being able to differentiate themselves from their competition. And that's how the electric toothbrush became a common product, is it started out as selling itself to a slightly different but still related market, and it continued to grow. That is what the entertainment industry has to do next. Where are the gaps? Well, there are many gaps that are open and notorious. And the fact that the industry is not trying to go for those gaps is a really dangerous sign for the people who have become, well, to use a grotesque term, fat and happy. I'm fat, so I can say that. But what it's missing is that you're going to start seeing them cannibalize each other, which we are indeed seeing. Let's face it, even though Skydance had to drop out of its deal to buy Paramount recently, Paramount is either going to be bought by someone else or they are going to go out of business, period. They do not have the ability to survive at this point. Warner Brothers, which I know people hate David Zaslav, they shouldn't, because without him, already that lot would have had a big for sale sign in front of it and all of their assets would have been fire sold off. Yes, it is that serious. And David Zaslav was actually ahead of paying off his interest payments. And the success of Barbie really put them on the right track. However, Barbie might have come too late. And what do I mean by that? The biggest problem that Zaslav has nothing to do with the creative part of the industry, has nothing to do with the strikes, and has everything to do with rising interest rates. The Warner Brothers company, when David Zaslav took it off of AT&T's hands, and remember, AT&T was willing when David Zaslav took it over to say that is a write-down for us. They were willing to say that they were willing to lose $45 billion out of the $85 billion they had paid for Warner Brothers within 2 years. This is not a sign that the industry was healthy. In fact, it was a sign it was in huge trouble. Now let's look at NBC Universal, which is arguably one of the most successful of the remaining studios, even though Peacock is something of a joke. How big a percentage of Comcast's total business is NBC Universal as a whole? It's approximately 15%. That means that 85% of Comcast NBC Universal is Comcast. And trust me, Comcast would love to offload NBC Universal because it's an expensive and not very lucrative part of their business. Let's be realistic. What is the annual studio at its height right now in today's world profit margin? Well, we've heard that Netflix is approximately 20%. That is why it remains a Wall Street darling. Most of the other studios are down around 10% if they are lucky. This creates a problem in a high interest rate environment where if you're just going to do short terms, you can get 5% with T-bills, which are government backed and guaranteed. So for putting out an incredible amount of risk and maybe looking at a 5% above the T-bill rate of return is all you can look for while facing potential cataclysmic loss, the way Furiosa was, that's not a good investment. No wonder venture capital is fleeing the industry. What are the solutions to this? One of the solutions is to severely cut costs. We've already seen that YouTube and the rest of the social media universe consumes about 85% of all viewership minutes. And that's really cheap. What are the studios doing with YouTube and Twitter and Twitch and Rumble and Instagram? Instead of looking at them and saying, what audience are they delivering to? They're looking at them as people who are somehow beneath them in the grand scheme of things, but that they will allow into their hallowed towers. But let's get real. Those services are actually potentially much more successful because they don't pay for the content. Most of the time, it's you get paid after. You as the content creator are giving them the material and sharing in the revenues that come back. No wonder the cost of most YouTube channels, even the biggest ones, is a pittance compared to the amount of money that it costs to make a movie. And for those that are very successful, which is admittedly a small percentage, but nonetheless quite a large number of people, they can make a very lucrative living, and some of them going even beyond what is possible to be made in Hollywood. So what is the lesson from that? The lesson from YouTube and from the other independent content creators is, what are the shows that are making it? Are they very glamorous? Are they all gorgeous people that everyone wants to be? Or are they normal schmoes? Just like with Marty in 1955, the majority of people who have large success on those venues are not particularly glamorous. They are average people. And if you look at the way most people consume Instagram and TikTok, yes, there are a large number of the people on those services who maybe do self-help and maybe, are gym bros or whatever. But still, the majority are people who do content that is about their lives and the struggles that they are going through at any given moment. And while people obsess over the scrolling, what's another way that people consume that content? They'll find someone that they relate to, and they'll sit there and watch maybe an hour's worth of these short videos in a row. So it is that humanist side that has been ignored. And as far as network development is concerned, network development, even though it has kind of gotten stuck in the same path of not being able to cancel successful shows even after decades because they're afraid they will never be able to replace the audience, still are going mostly for the emotional content. Because after all, when you invite someone into your house every week or more, you are bonding with them. So you have to connect with them emotionally, not connect on the spectacle. Look at the success of Baby Reindeer. It's a very dramatic show. Wasn't nearly as expensive as a show like The Acolyte. And yet people are watching it. They're watching a guy who is far from perfect being real. So that is where the opportunities are in the future. When things in the industry are bad, many of those below the line jobs become very tough to get because there's not as much production. But the above the line becomes easier because at that moment, instead of looking to give whoever the hot name of the moment is an unbelievable amount of money, you start trying to find fire in a bottle, which means a cheaper talent that's new. Let's be crass about it, because they are cheaper and you can build them into a star. And you are willing at that point to look for creatives that are the same way. They are telling more modest stories that don't have as high a budget, but have a much greater opportunity for large returns. So that is where we are sitting right now. And as long as the industry continues insisting on the acolyte being the norm, you're going to see more studios get into the point where they are going to be on the verge of bankruptcy. We're already about to lose 2. Do we really want another one to fall on top of that?
Shall we dance? High, high, so high society,